Well, you're in for a real treat on this one because we're going to talk about butts today. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Sarah, and I hope each and every one of you is having an absolute banger of a day. Thank you so much for joining me for another video. If you are new to the channel, thanks for coming along. I hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you've been here before, well, you're in for a real treat on this one because we're going to talk about butts today. Well, maybe not butts in general. My butt? Oh God, no, horrible idea. Scratch that. We're gonna talk about what I park my butt on, and that's this Specialized Power Mimic saddle. And I've had it for just about a year now, and I wanna do a long-term review and appraisal of what I think of the saddle and how it's worked for me over thousands of miles of riding in the last 12 months. But, see what I did there with the butt? See that? That's a dad joke gone horribly, horribly wrong. Please ignore that, I'm an idiot. In any event, I wanna start by talking a little bit about saddles in general, talk about my progression through saddles as I progressed as a cyclist, and then I'll get more into the meat and potatoes of this particular saddle because I want people who are in maybe their first 5 years or so of cycling to really kind of understand this subject because it's not something that's talked about very often, at least not in real world plain terms, and we get very technical with some of this stuff and we just don't pay as much attention as we should. Saddles in general are probably one of the most, if not the most important pieces of equipment that you can put into your arsenal in terms of performance on the bike. If you're on a bad saddle, you cannot underestimate how badly that can affect your performance. First and foremost, because of aerodynamics. People buy really expensive frames and wheels to get as much speed as possible on the road, but if you're on a bad saddle that's not comfortable for you, you'll be sitting more upright and you'll have that whole frontal area up in the wind that's going to be taking away all that speed that you paid for. In terms of power transfer, it can be extremely important. If you're not seated on the saddle well, and if you're not comfortable, that power transfer down through your hips, into your legs, into the pedals, is not going to be as efficient or as powerful as you need it to be, and what you've trained really hard to execute, you're not able to do because you're just losing so much in inefficiency and bad positioning. And another element is fatigue and early breakdown. If you are not comfortable on the saddle, you are going to feel it the entire time, and it's going to cause your body to break down in fatigue far earlier than it needs to, and it could happen at a time that's really important, an important training session, a group ride, a race. You don't want to break down because a piece of equipment is holding you back. The thing with saddles is I like to analogize it to buying tires on a vehicle. It's extremely important to buy tires for your car. It's going to increase the safety of your vehicle. It's going to increase the handling and the comfort, the performance, the fuel economy of your vehicle. But nobody really wants to do it because they're expensive. It's not really a sexy thing to buy. Nobody really pays attention to them. They're not particularly flashy. Same thing goes with saddles, right? You park your ass on this thing. You don't get to see it. Nobody else is really looking at it. It doesn't make your bike flashy. It's not fun to play with. It's not a cool new gadget for the front of your bike or a new group set or a new frame or expensive new pair of wheels that's going to make your bike faster. It's literally just this piece of carbon and foam that's going to sit on the top of your bike, and you're going to park your ass on top of it, and then you're going to forget completely about it. But a good saddle, you should be able to forget about because you want to be comfortable on the bike for as long as possible, which makes it extremely important. So hopefully by the end of this video, you might have some answers to questions that you might not know about and understand these things in more real world terms than highly technical terms that you'll find on saddle reviews or company marketing material. So I want to start with my progression through saddles because I think it'll put into better context how your riding style and your saddle choices are probably going to change as you progress in the sport. So what works for you in years 1 through 3 is very likely to not work as well for you or at all for you in years 4 through 7. People might not wrap their heads around it. They don't understand because they were comfortable for years on one particular saddle, so they look at everything else. They look at fit, they look at chamois, they look at all of these other things and completely ignore the saddle because they think that whatever worked for them before is going to continue to work for them. So when I started cycling more seriously, moving from a recreational cyclist to somebody who wanted to train more with purpose and perhaps be a little bit more competitive, I bought my first serious road bike, and I had this saddle right here, and this is a Physique Aliante saddle, and it really doesn't matter what the brand of the saddle is in this case, but it was just a very generic kind of saddle. This is a pretty much a middle of the road type of saddle in terms of road cycling. It's not your budget level and it's not a high end. It's just very, it's made of quality materials. It lasts a long time, decent duration barometer on the foam here, but it's just nothing special. Typical wave design, there's a bunch of different shapes, and that's really contingent on you as a rider and your body shape and morphology. It's this pretty common wave design with a decent flare and wide back end so that you can be comfortable with it. And I was fine with this for years, and the biggest reason I was fine with it is because when you are in your first couple years of cycling and you're just building your endurance and your power in general, you tend to be a little bit more upright. So your arms are a little bit more outstretched, you're more comfortable on your tops or on the tops of your hoods, and you're not really in the low drops as much, and you're not looking to execute power in a more aerodynamic position because you're still building those fundamentals. And I was the same way, just more upright. The saddle was perfectly fine. But as I started to progress in my cycling and started to focus more on applying power in the aerodynamic position and started to build my power, this stopped working for me, and I was uncomfortable, and I really didn't know particularly why. And it really was because I was trying to lean more into my saddle. I was in a more neutral pelvis position, and it was putting way too much pressure in the soft tissue, and then I was just kind of squirming back and forth, and I'd put excess pressure on my sit bones to offload the soft tissue and vice versa. So the saddle stopped working for me, and it was really not particularly comfortable after a couple of years of riding. Then I progressed into this saddle here. This is also a Physique saddle. Physique makes very good quality products. That design just didn't work for me. So I moved into this Arione, and this is the Donna version. This is just a women's specific version. It's a little bit different in its geometry, but the same general idea. Very flat, very kind of that aero design, lets you kind of nose up front on the saddle, which is what I was doing when I was starting to get more aerodynamic. I was starting to push forward, and now this saddle doesn't have the wave design, so it wasn't pushing me back in the saddle and having me kind of tip back and forth off my pelvis. I was able to more adequately adjust my position to what was comfortable for me. Additionally, when you are putting more power in the pedals, it takes some of the pressure off of your hands and off of the saddle. Those are your 3 points of contact on the bike that are going to be supporting your weight: your handlebars, your saddle, and your pedals. So putting in more power allows you to take some of the pressure off of your sit bones and your soft tissue, so you're not putting as much on the saddle. And this seemed to be a pretty good balance of everything. And I rode this for probably 3-4 years, and it worked perfectly fine. In fact, I still ride the saddle on one of my bikes for outdoor rides. This does just fine for me. But what I found last year is I moved from a wheel-on indoor trainer to a direct drive trainer. So I wasn't having the same flexibility, and I don't have a rocker plate under my trainer right now. So I was starting to realize that I was getting really uncomfortable on rides after 90 minutes, 2 hours, when on the road I can do this for 4, 5, 6 hours. I was riding in good quality chamois. I had my fit checked. Everything still seemed to check out. But what I realized was that it was just all in the saddle. It was all in that pressure I was getting in my sit bones and up in the soft tissue area. And going back to that same concept that I was seeing with this saddle here, where I was doing a lot of shifting back and forth to offload and just basically choosing pressure points. And to exacerbate that, when you're riding in the off season, you're not applying as much power. You're more focused on endurance or tempo level riding. So I was masking a lot of some of those discomfort issues that I may have had on this saddle outdoors, but I was able to completely eliminate by just being outdoors, having the flex in the bike, being able to kind of tip from side to side, and having more positional changes and more power in the pedals. I figured after several years it was about time to start looking into a new saddle. In my research, I'm looking for some of the better quality saddles and the more comfortable saddles, and I stumbled on this one here. Now this is the Specialized Power Mimic saddle. This is the S-Works version. There are 4 different versions of the saddle, so I'll talk about that in a minute. But this was very highly rated. Now Specialized has put the most research into this saddle of any of the saddles in their lineup. In fact, it is the most researched saddle on the market in general. And that's saying a lot for Specialized, because Specialized puts a lot of research and development into all of their products. They're very scientifically based. They are definitely the weight weenies, the data junkies of the cycling world. Love or hate their products. They do a really good job of putting a lot of science behind their product, and this is definitely no exception. And the idea behind the saddle was to basically figure out an alternative to the cutout saddle. Now I've never used a cutout saddle. I don't particularly like them. A lot of people move to it to remove the pressure from their soft tissue by allowing that soft tissue to kind of drop into a cutout in the middle of the saddle, which is why you'll see some with some of these depressions rather than cutouts. But what a lot of people were finding was that cutout was actually a more of like a pinch point, causing more swelling and more pressure over time because there just was no support there. So they wanted to hybridize this by creating the same element that you would find in the cutout, but still applying the support. And they did this with this foam that they put down the middle here. And this is their mimic technology. And this is kind of a memory foam here that is to mimic the soft tissue. So the density of the soft tissue that you'll find is what you're going to find in this particular foam here. Now, this was designed specifically for women in mind. All the research went behind women, but what they found is that men love the saddle too. It provides the similar benefits to men, and they absolutely love it. And there's nothing about this that says that this is a woman's saddle. Anybody can ride this saddle, but it was designed with women in mind, with that kind of area in the soft tissue, and as you go into that neutral pelvis, trying to be able to support it without adding too much pressure. So what you're gonna have on this saddle here is this foam here that's going to change in density to be more supportive where it needs to be in terms of your soft tissue. So when you're leaned forward, you don't have to have too much pressure on your sit bones or too much pressure on the soft tissue. This is going to give where it needs to while still providing support, so you're not getting any kind of that numbness or fatigue in that area that can be very uncomfortable over time. And this foam will change to the appropriate density in different areas. So back where you have your sit bones, that's still the same supportive foam that you're going to find on pretty much any other saddle. And then in the center portion here, it's going to get a lot softer, a lot more supportive. Now this has a slight wave to it, but it isn't anything severe, so I'm able to still kind of nose up on the saddle. And what's actually pretty interesting about my progression here is, as somebody who nosed up on the saddle quite a bit, I thought this long nose saddle was going to be important for me. You see how much longer this is than the mimic saddle here. I thought that that was going to be extremely important, but the reality is if you look at triathlon and the ISM saddles, the triathletes who sit in that very aggressive aerodynamic position and want to be up towards the front of the saddle, that shorter nose is actually more effective to them. It allows them to park their sit bones without putting pressure up into their pelvis and tipping them backwards. It allows them to keep that neutral position. So this is kind of a hybrid between something like an ISM and a typical road saddle, which has worked extremely well for me. And that brings me into the long-term review. I have used this for a year now, and I will not look back on this saddle. I absolutely think it was 100% worth the money. I paid $300 for this saddle, and it is a saddle that has allowed me to get more value out of the training programs that I pay for, out of my bike in general, out of my time. So I've ended up getting more than the value of what I've paid for this saddle into my use of the bike, which I might have been less inclined to do because I was less comfortable. The saddle does precisely what it's designed to do. It just offloads the pressure in just the right areas so that you can maintain the right amount of pressures in your sit bones and you're not subconsciously rotating into different areas to offload discomfort somewhere else. So it has worked really well for me for long rides. I've been up to 5-hour rides on the indoor trainer and have done absolutely fine with the saddle. Of course, for sitting long periods of time, any saddle is going to start to get a little bit sore and uncomfortable. You just sitting that long on something that narrow gets uncomfortable for anybody, but definitely doable, definitely comfortable, and it translates to the outdoors as well. Now that brings me into why I bought the $300 S-Works version, which is the top of the line version. So there are 4 different versions of this saddle, one for pretty much every budget, and I'll link some of that information down below. Prices will change over time. But at the time of making this video, this top tier one is the S-Works. This is $300. And what's important to note is that every single one of these saddles, from the low tier, which is the $130 model, up to the top tier, that is a $300 model, it's the same exact technology and upper on the saddle. So in terms of comfort, you are getting the same exact experience whether you buy the cheapest or the most expensive in this lineup, which is very important to note. So you don't have to break the bank on the $300 saddle to get the comfort level that you would get out of this mimic foam in this technology. The difference is the materials that the lower base of this saddle as well as the rails are made out of. So the top tier S-Works saddle combines the best materials with the weight weenie element. And this is 170 grams. It has a carbon rails and it has a carbon base. Now the carbon base is not just about the weight. It's also about some of the vibration dampening that you're going to get out of the carbon material versus the nylon composite they use for the lower end. So for me, riding on rough roads, that was important to me as well, and then paying a few extra bucks for the carbon rails to cut that little extra weight out of there was worth it to me, but it might not be necessary to you. Then you take it a step down to the pro level. It's the same exact base and the same exact upper material, and the rails are just made out of titanium. So a little heavier material in the rails, but nothing that's going to really make a huge difference to you. Then if you move into the expert level, which is the second from the bottom, again, same material up here, but the base turns into a nylon and carbon composite material. So a little bit heavier, a little less vibration dampening, and again, you have the titanium rails down here. And then the final version of the saddle, which is their entry level, that is the comp, and that's going to have chrome rails down here, and it's going to have that nylon carbon base. So that might be something if you're on a budget, or if you're just going to be using it for an indoor trainer, you may as well just go with the cheapest model and just park it on the indoor trainer and have a nice comfortable saddle to ride on with the technology that you need. It's also important to note that saddles are extremely personalized. What works for a lot of people may just absolutely suck for you. It depends on how you're built, it depends on how you ride. Again, your own riding style and saddles can change over time, and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I think that this saddle here casts a very wide net. It captures a wide array of riders. They come in different widths so that you can kind of customize it to your body type and your size so that you can get a good fix on your sit bone position on the back of the saddle. But it may work for you, it may not. I think it has a very good chance of working for you just because of the technology and the research that's gone into it. But if it's something that you're thinking about, what I recommend with this or any saddle is try to get either a good relationship with your local bike shop, see if they'll let you borrow a saddle, or maybe if they're set up really well with the manufacturers, they'll have sample saddles. They're usually in really hideous colors so that nobody steals them. But maybe they'll let you take it for a few days to a week or so and really put it through its paces and ride around and see if it's right for you. You can also purchase one online, and if they have a good return policy, you can certainly ride it and return it if it really doesn't work for you. Just be respectful of it. Don't beat up the saddle too much. Don't drop it on the ground. Don't scuff it up. You know, if it's just a matter of not being a good fit for you, then maybe you can return it. If you can't return the saddle, they can usually hold their resale value pretty well, especially if they're a higher tier saddle or a very highly coveted saddle like this one here. It just kind of depends, but just plan for that. The best thing to do is to be able to go to a local bike shop and just be able to try something out to see if it works for you, because again, very individualized. While this is probably going to work for most people, it's not going to work for all. So in terms of my use, I would recommend it. I think it's worth a look and a try. I will link the specialized information down below so you can do your own research and compare the 4 models side to side. They're also looking into making different shapes of this saddle now that it's kind of vetted. So you might have ones that are flatter with more of a flare in the rear, more variety in terms of the Mimic technology, which I'm already starting to see hit the market, which is very cool. You can look into that and the different designs there. But at any rate, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please leave them down below. I'd be happy to engage with you guys more down there. If you wouldn't mind hitting the thumbs up button if you got any value out of this video, I certainly would appreciate it. It does help the channel and the video out quite a bit. Subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, I will catch you in the next one. See ya.